Ma'am, this entrance is for invited guests only. The service entrance is around back. He said it without looking at her. He was already looking past her, scanning the marble steps behind her, one hand resting on his radio. His name tag read Delaney. He was 42 years old, broad-shouldered, dressed in the private security uniform of the Hargrove Meridian Hotel, a navy blazer with gold trim and a wire behind his left ear. He had worked every major event at this hotel for 11 years. He knew who belonged. She stood at the base of the steps in a burgundy gown that had been tailored in Paris. Her name was Vivienne Okafor. She had not said a word yet. The caterers come in through the side, he continued. I'm going to need you to move along. Vivienne looked at him. She looked at the golden placard mounted on a post beside the doors, Pinnacle Capital Group Annual Investment Gala. By invitation only. She looked at the guests streaming past her in their tuxedos and gowns, each one given a small, gracious nod by Delaney as they climbed the steps. She looked back at him. I have an invitation, she said. Sure you do. He finally looked at her. Name? Vivienne Okafor. He ran a finger down the guest list on his tablet. He scrolled to the O's. He scrolled back up. He pressed his lips together in a thin, practiced expression that was not quite a smile. I don't see it. Look again. Behind her, a young man in a gray jacket stopped filming on his phone and let out a short laugh. A woman in a white evening dress looked at Vivienne, looked at the security officer, and then looked carefully away. A hotel doorman on the other side of the entrance kept his eyes on the pavement. Delaney took a single step forward. I'm going to need to ask you to step aside. You are blocking the entrance. Vivienne Okafor stepped aside. She did not reach for her purse. She did not raise her voice. She took a deliberate step to the right, out of the path of the other guests, and she reached into the small clutch in her hand. She produced a card. She held it out. He did not take it. Ma'am, read it. He had no idea. Because the woman he had just turned away from the entrance to the Pinnacle Capital Group Annual Investment Gala. The woman he had redirected to the service entrance was the sole reason this event was happening at all. Vivienne Okafor was the founder and chief executive officer of Okafor Capital Partners, managing $14.2 billion in institutional assets across 22 countries. She had been the keynote speaker at this gala for the past 3 years running. She was scheduled to close tonight's event with the announcement of a $3 billion infrastructure co-investment with Pinnacle's board. A deal 3 years in the making. A deal that would be, by any measure, the largest single transaction in Pinnacle Capital's 40-year history. And in 47 minutes, she would walk back out of this building, and that deal would be gone. They just didn't know it yet. But this story doesn't start here. Rewind 8 months. Rewind to a Tuesday morning in October in a corner office on the 41st floor of a building in Lower Manhattan, where Vivienne Okafor arrived at 6:45 a.m. The way she arrived every morning, first before her assistant, before her managing directors, before the market opened. Her full name was Vivienne Adeyeze Okafor. She was 51 years old. She had been born in Lagos to a mother who was a secondary school mathematics teacher and a father who repaired motorcycles in a workshop that smelled of gasoline and kerosene, and who told her every single morning before she walked out the door that the world would ask more of her than it asked of anyone else, and that she should do more than the world asked anyway. She had done that. Every day. For 30 years. She had studied economics at Howard University on a merit scholarship, then finance at the London School of Economics, then worked 14-hour days at a midtown investment firm until she understood every instrument, every lever, every mechanism by which money moved in the world. She had founded Okafor Capital Partners at the age of 37 with 2 analysts, a leased office, and a vision for long-duration infrastructure investment that most of her male contemporaries dismissed as unsophisticated. She had proven them wrong in writing, in returns, in the pages of every financial publication that mattered, and in the bank accounts of the pension funds and sovereign wealth funds and university endowments, whose futures she had spent 14 years building with methodical, documented precision. On her desk sat 2 things she looked at every morning. The first was a framed letter written in shaky cursive on a piece of light blue stationery, her father's handwriting, dated 4 years before he died, that said simply, "You have already done what they said you could not. Now show them what they never imagined." The second was a photograph of herself at 37, standing outside a glass building with 2 other women, all 3 of them holding a single piece of paper, the fund's first ever subscription agreement. The amount on that paper had been $400,000. Their first client, a retired schoolteacher from Bethesda who had believed in them when no one else would. That morning in October, Vivienne had been scheduled for a call with Pinnacle Capital's CEO, Douglas Whitmore. Pinnacle was one of the oldest and most storied names in American institutional investment, known for its infrastructure portfolio, known for its annual gala, and known in certain circles for its particular difficulty in conducting business with women of color in leadership positions. 3 of the 4 largest deals Pinnacle had walked away from in the previous decade had involved co-investment partners led by Black executives. That fact was documented. It had been documented by a journalist at the Financial Times, by a researcher at Columbia Business School, and by an internal equity review that Pinnacle had quietly commissioned and then quietly shelved. Vivienne Okafor knew about the shelved report. She had been sent a copy by someone who worked inside Pinnacle and who had grown tired of watching the same conversations happen in the same closed rooms. Her chief of staff, Renata Diallo, 28 years a portfolio risk analyst, the sharpest reader of institutional behavior Vivienne had ever met, had assessed the document in one sentence: "They will take the meeting." Watch what happens next. What happened next was that Douglas Whitmore flew to New York in February, sat across from Vivienne in her conference room, and called the proposed co-investment the most compelling infrastructure opportunity I've seen in 20 years. He shook her hand. He asked his team to prepare documentation. He put a number on the table: $3 billion, split across a 15-year deployment cycle, anchored to water infrastructure in the Gulf Coast and Southeast. He wanted the announcement made at the annual gala. He wanted her on the stage. The deal was set. The gala was tonight. And at 7:14 p.m., Vivienne Okafor was standing at the service entrance of the Hargrove Meridian Hotel because a man named Delaney had not read the guest list carefully enough, or had not wanted to. She made her way through the service entrance the way she had been directed. She walked through a corridor that smelled of floor cleaner and linen spray, past folded tablecloths stacked on wire racks, past 2 catering staff who looked at her without speaking. She emerged into the lobby from a side door and asked the concierge to connect her to Douglas Whitmore's assistant. She did not go to the cocktail reception. She did not go to the pre-event dinner. She stood in a small alcove near the elevators in her burgundy gown, and she made 3 calls. The first call was to Renata. Documented. The officer's name is Delaney. The time was 7:14. Get me the hotel security vendor contract. Renata was already pulling it up before the call ended. The second call was to her general counsel, Marcus Webb. 22 years in corporate law, formerly of the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. "I need you in this building," she said. Don't hurry. Just come. He was in the lobby in 12 minutes. The third call was to a number she rarely used. It was the private line of a former colleague who was now a senior correspondent at the Wall Street Journal's markets desk. She did not ask for anything. She said only, "Be available tomorrow morning. I have something to tell you." Then she put her phone in her clutch and walked into the grand ballroom. Inside, Douglas Whitmore found her immediately. He was 63 years old, silver-haired, the kind of man who moved through rooms like rooms had been built to receive him. He crossed the floor with his hand extended and his face composed into the expression he used for important guests. "Vivienne, you look extraordinary. We've been looking for you." "Have you?" she said. He stopped. Something in her stillness registered. "Is everything all right?" She looked at him for a moment. She had been doing this for 30 years. She had been doing this since before he knew her name. She had been doing this since before anyone in this room had believed that her fund, her instincts, and her particular understanding of how capital moved through infrastructure and time would produce what it had produced. She had been doing this alone, in rooms like this one, with men like this one, with a calm that cost her something every single time. "I was redirected to the service entrance," she said, "by your officer at the front steps." Douglas Whitmore's face did not move. Then it moved. "I'm sure there was a miscommunication. His name was Delaney," she said. The time was 7:14. "My general counsel is in the lobby. I wanted to tell you in person." 31 minutes left. The ballroom was filling. The event program had Vivienne's remarks scheduled for 9:00 p.m. She was listed in the printed program as keynote and special announcement, V. Okafor Capital Partners. The programs had been printed, folded, and placed at every seat. There were 300 seats. There were journalists in the room. There was a live stream coordinator setting up a camera at the back. Whitmore had stepped away. He was speaking to a younger man with a headset, speaking quickly, his silver head bent forward. His face had taken on a quality that was no longer composed. The younger man with the headset spoke into his earpiece. Delaney, at the front entrance, received a message. Vivienne stood with a glass of water that someone had placed in her hand and thought about the 47-year-old woman who had stood outside a different building in a different city and been told that the parking was around the side. She thought about the partner at a firm she had tried to join at 29, who had told her, very kindly, very carefully, that the culture there was a particular fit. She thought about the research analyst who had publicly questioned whether her fund's returns could be accurately attributed to her decisions. She thought about her father's letter in its frame on her desk and what it had cost him to write it. She thought about the deal. $3 billion. 15 years. Water infrastructure in areas where the pipes were still lead, where the systems were still failing, where the people who would be served by that investment were overwhelmingly the people whose names did not appear on the guest lists of galas like this one. She thought about all of it. 18 minutes. A woman appeared at Vivienne's elbow. Her name was Sandra Osei, Okafor Capital's Deputy Chief Investment Officer, 39 years old, and she had arrived at the hotel 4 minutes ago after Vivienne had sent a single text message. Sandra had a tablet in one hand and a composed expression that told Vivienne everything she needed to know. Sandra had already begun the paperwork. "You're sure?" Sandra said quietly. "I'm sure," Vivienne said. Sandra nodded once and stepped away. Douglas Whitmore returned. Behind him came two other men, Pinnacle's president of operations and their head of institutional relations. All three of them had the quality of men who were accustomed to smoothing things over, to finding the language that made difficult things manageable, to producing outcomes that protected the institution. "Vivienne," Whitmore said. I want to apologize on behalf of the hotel and on behalf of Pinnacle. What happened this evening was completely unacceptable. We're addressing it right now. I want to make sure you know that this event tonight is about you and about everything you have built, Douglas," she said. He stopped. "I know what this event is about." She set down her glass of water on a passing tray. She turned to face all three of them with the calm that her father had described, that her mother had modeled, that 30 years of being the only person in rooms like this had made as natural as breathing. "I've spent 3 years building this deal. I've spent 8 months sitting across from your team, providing documentation, answering questions, and demonstrating that Okafor Capital's $14.2 billion in assets under management is more than sufficient to anchor a 15-year co-investment of this scale." She paused. "Tonight, at 7:14 p.m., your officer directed me to the service entrance. He did not read the guest list, or he read it and made a different decision. I don't know which. What I know is that I am not able to stand in front of 300 people, including the limited partners of this fund, the journalists who cover this space, and the institutional partners who have been waiting 3 years for this announcement, and tell them that Pinnacle Capital is the kind of institution I trust to execute this work." The room was loud around them. No one in the immediate area could hear this conversation. But Vivienne was not speaking quietly because she wanted to keep it private. She was speaking quietly because she did not need to be loud. She had never needed to be loud. "The deal is withdrawn," she said. "My general counsel is preparing the documentation. I'll give your legal team until tomorrow morning, as a courtesy, before we notify the institutional partners." Douglas Whitmore's face had done something she recognized. She had seen it before, in other rooms, on other faces. The color had left it. Not from shame, she was not naive enough to assume that. From calculation. From the arithmetic of consequence that his mind was performing in real time. $3 billion. The announcement that was supposed to define this gala. The printed programs with her name on them, the live-streamed camera at the back of the room, the journalists with notebooks, the partners who had flown from London and Singapore and Toronto. "Gone, Vivienne," he said. "Please, let us." "Douglas," she said his name with the same tone she had used when she had said read it to the officer at the front steps. Final. Clear. Documented. I share this not because I want your apology. I share it because most of the people your officer turns away from front entrances don't have general counsels in the lobby. They don't have the platform to make this conversation visible. They just leave. She smoothed her gown. "I am leaving. But I'm not leaving quietly." She walked through the ballroom, through the grand doors, down the marble steps, and past the place where Delaney was no longer standing. Marcus Webb fell into step beside her at the bottom of the stairs. Sandra Osai was already on her phone. The car was waiting. They were 4 blocks away when Vivienne's phone showed the first notification. The live-stream coordinator at the back of the ballroom had heard something from the catering staff, who had seen a woman in a burgundy gown walk through the service corridor. The coordinator had mentioned it to a colleague. The colleague had mentioned it to a journalist. The journalist had a Twitter account with 80,000 followers. By 10:00 p.m. that night, the phrase "service entrance" was trending in financial news circles. By 11:00 p.m., Pinnacle Capital's Wikipedia page had been edited 4 times. By 6:00 a.m. the following morning, a reporter from the Wall Street Journal had published a 400-word piece under the headline, "Okafor Capital withdraws $3 deal after CEO's treatment at Pinnacle Gala event." The article did not editorialize. It did not label anything. It described what happened. It described the officer's name, the time, the service entrance, the guest list, the withdrawn documentation. It quoted Vivienne in 2 sentences. "The deal is withdrawn." I hope this conversation leads to something more important than one transaction. The article was read 4.3 million times in its first 24 hours. Delaney was placed on administrative leave by the hotel's security contractor the following afternoon, following a review of the guest list and 3 witness statements from catering staff who had seen the interaction. The hotel's security vendor, a firm called Meridian Shield Services, issued a public statement saying the incident did not reflect their standards. Delaney had 7 prior documented complaints from hotel staff about interactions with guests of color. All 7 had been reviewed internally. None had resulted in disciplinary action. The hotel's management had been aware of at least 3. That information was published in a follow-up piece 4 days later. Douglas Whitmore called Vivienne's office 6 times in the 72 hours following the gala. She did not take the calls. On the 7th attempt, she asked Marcus Webb to speak with Pinnacle's general counsel. The conversation lasted 14 minutes. Whitmore issued a public statement of apology on the 5th day. His board of directors announced the formation of an external advisory committee on equitable institutional practice the following week. The appointment of the committee's chair, a former senior official from the Office of Civil Rights at the Department of Education, was reported in 3 national publications. Vivienne did not comment on the committee. She had not been asked to. 6 weeks after the gala, Okafor Capital Partners announced a new co-investment partnership with a different institution, a Boston-based fund with a 20-year track record in infrastructure equity and a leadership team that was, notably, 70% women and 40% people of color. The deal was worth $3.1 billion. The announcement was made on a Tuesday morning without a gala, and a press release sent to every major financial wire service at 6:45 a.m. Marcus Webb became Okafor Capital's first general counsel on a permanent retainer. Renata Diallo was named Chief Operating Officer. Sandra Osei's promotion to Chief Investment Officer was announced the following quarter. The young man in the gray jacket who had filmed the front steps interaction and laughed posted a video 18 days later. He did not explain what he had seen or offer an apology. He enrolled 6 months after that in a financial literacy program. The woman in the white evening dress, who had looked carefully away, wrote a letter to the Financial Times. The hotel doorman, who had kept his eyes on the pavement, submitted a formal written statement to the hotel's review committee. His statement was 3 pages long. In it, he described 11 other incidents he had witnessed over 4 years of working the entrance. He had documented them in a notebook he kept in his locker. Someone had been watching. The Columbia Business School researcher, who had documented Pinnacle's pattern, expanded her paper. It was published in a peer-reviewed journal. It was cited by 3 congressional staffers in 2 separate hearings. It was downloaded 47,000 times. Vivienne Okafor returned to the office the Wednesday after the gala at 6:45 a.m. She unlocked her own door. She set down her bag. She looked at the letter in its frame on her desk, at the shaky cursive of a man who had repaired motorcycles in Lagos, and who had known, somehow, in the way that parents know, that the world his daughter was walking into would require everything she had. She sat down. She opened her email. She went to work. On the wall behind her desk, in small block letters that she had framed the year she founded the fund, were 4 words: documentation wins. Evidence is everything. Somewhere in the building, a younger analyst was arriving early. Somewhere in the city, a pension fund was reviewing its allocations. Somewhere in the country, lead pipes were still leaking into the water of a neighborhood that no one at a gala in the Hargrove Meridian Hotel had been thinking about. Until now. Until the system changes, she said once, quietly, to Renata, in the elevator going up. Someone has to be watching. Renata had looked at her for a moment. "We are," she said. "If this story made you feel something, anger, clarity, or just the need to sit with what you know to be true, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because stories like Vivienne's don't spread on their own. We spread them." Together, drop a comment below. Have you ever been in a room or turned away from one because of what you looked like rather than what you had built? Subscribe for more stories that name what is happening and honor the people who refuse to leave quietly. Because every view is a vote for accountability, and accountability is how things change.